All right, we're going to get started with the next session. I guess this is our last one, right? We saved the best for last. I want to introduce Chris Will. I've known Chris for many years. I say many years, 2009, however long that's been, I think. When I used to work for KDF doing forest health programs, some of y'all were introduced to Chris yesterday. If I didn't say it then, even if I did say it then, I'm going to say it again. Chris is one of the most technical people I've ever worked with in forest management, especially in oak hickory systems. Chris and I have collaborated on programs. I've been in the field with Chris. I don't think I've ever treated invasives with Chris. We do. I've had other team members who I would send out to work with Chris though to get experience because Chris is very experienced. All right, into the formal stuff. So Chris is the president of Central Kentucky Forest Management. It's a private company. He's a consulting forester. Chris is essentially involved in all aspects of forest management, especially if there's a silviculture part to it, a commercial aspect to it. And if you have an ecology question, even though he will deny this, he's a good dude to talk to about that at the same time. He's probably one of the most responsible folks in this world, like in the consulting forestry world that I've ever worked with. And that's why I usually call him first, right? If for something like this, just for that reason, is a level of robust experience. Anyway, so Central Kentucky Forest Management's been going since '99. Before that, Chris worked in log and timber procurement for about 13 years. And this has given him an in-depth understanding of forest products industry and the value of standing timber. And, a big part of Chris's goal is to provide forest landowners with science-based knowledge about forest management. Right? And I don't know if I shouldn't be saying this. We've had these discussions. If it's not a good project, a responsible project, it's going to raise an eyebrow with Chris. He's not just going to do anything, right? You can tell I have a lot of respect for him, right? So anyway, I'm probably going to fumble my way through the rest of this intro. Chris is going to do a much better job. So I'm going to let you take it from here because I'm just talking a lot.
Thank you, Jody, for that very generous introduction. And thank you, Casey and the KSU organization for inviting me here. When I get a chance to talk at this symposium, I usually jump at it. I really enjoy the fact that everybody out in the crowd tomorrow is going to be in the field wading through invasive species and in difficult weather conditions. And then I appreciate that because I spend most of my days out in the field as well. So I really appreciate it. I'm going to talk today. I got my technology down. Yeah, great. I'm going to talk today about a couple of things I'm passionate about: oak silviculture and invasive species control. And I live in Boyle County, and so that puts me in an interesting spot geographically. I can be in the outer bluegrass, I can be in the knobs, I can be on the west or the eastern edge of the pennyrile in just a short distance, and I get to work in all those different environments. So it's pretty cool. I'm kind of slow coming to invasive species control work. I spent most of my career in the forest industry and kind of struggling with, how to feed the mill in my procurement part of my life. And then also about working with landowners and making sure that they're getting a fair shake in a timber sale transaction, but also, are they getting a good forest? Are they getting a new young forest in the place where they're harvesting the older trees? So I'm going to try and blend those two worlds, the invasive species end of it with the forest management end of it. I'm kind of a map geek, and I ran across, everybody's probably familiar with this diagram, but I kind of dug up where this came from. Lobick and his book, the Midland Trail in Kentucky, is a really interesting publication. And what I did was I kept looking at that map, and I put those county. I just superimposed that over the county polygons and put the county names on there just using GIS. That thing is amazing. That hand-drawn map that Lubbock did back when he did it, that is just amazingly accurate. I can plot my individual projects on there, and he just was a fantastic map builder. And so I was always really impressed with that. Today, what we're going to do, I said that I work in several different physiographic regions. Well, there they are up there. I'm going to concentrate on that dark green area, well, the moderately green area surrounding the inner bluegrass. I'm going to talk about the outer bluegrass. I can't help but talk about the knobs because the two physiographic regions kind of blend together. What's fascinating about that outer bluegrass region is it's not even uniform within itself. You can keep breaking down the detail. And so this area is just fascinating. There's all sorts of great botanists and map makers and people interested in the ecology of this area. And so, Lucy Braun, Lubbock and his, Julian Campbell and that Bluegrass Woodlands website is fantastic. I don't know if anybody knows Julian, but man, just very good info. Is this Julian? No. Oh, okay. You all know him. You got to invite him. I got to meet the guy. Good stuff. Just fascinating details about the history of this region. And of course, Bryant and the publication that Oak Hickory Forests of the Eden Shale Belt. So I hope you pick up one of these and look through them. Great information on this ecological region. So Cody, I walk around in the woods with Cody Jarrett, private lands biologist, and he knows that when I get into oak woodland, I get excited and start talking about the whole ecology of oak. And so as foresters, if we're going to manage for oak, we got to understand the ecology of these individual species. And so everything I know probably came from these three publications. That's the first one on the far right there is a publication Jeff Stringer and his group at the University of Kentucky put this together in mid-2000s, and this was really some instrumental work at that time, and it still holds up. That document is the one you want to sit down and you want to read. The Oak Bible, I got to include that on the list. This thing is thick, and all the information in there is backed up by extensive research, and it's just a fabulous resource. But if you've only got, 20, 30 minutes to spend on this whole thing, go seek out Dr. Dan Day's Sustainable Oak Forests in Eastern North America, Regeneration and Recruitment, the Pillars of Sustainability. This takes you through the whole thing, the problem and the solution. So I always encourage, whenever I get in front of a bunch of young foresters, I always encourage them to pick up these things. There's a wealth of knowledge in this stuff, and this is how we drive these science-based silvicultural prescriptions that we're going to talk about. So we can start talking about woodlands, and I get, everybody in this audience understands and appreciates the multiple values that come from our oak woodlands. And And there's some real drivers on here. On the bottom right-hand corner, a lot of my clients are hunters, and they're some of the most active land managers that I have. And so we also know about clean water and clean air, carbon sequestration, timber values. Up in the upper right-hand corner up there, the bourbon industry has really been growing, and that depends on a single species coming out of our woods, white oak. Everybody's aware of that. Those white oak barrels are in demand, and so it's a good thing and it's a bad thing. It's a good thing because that adds value to our woodlands. That money we can turn right back in and manage our woodlands and do a better job than we ever did before by taking those higher value products. But the problem is everybody wants their money now. And so that drives a lot of bad decisions a lot of times. And so a lot of people you'll find out in life really aren't patient. And so oak management requires patience. Jeff Stringer came up with this graphic, and I think this is the whole story of why we're challenged in regenerating and maintaining our oak forests. There are certain, just like there's laws of nature, gravity exists. There's no disputing that. Well, if you want to regenerate an oak forest, you've got to have high vigor, tall oak regeneration before you harvest. It's just like jumping off that cliff. I guarantee you every time you're going to hit the ground splat, right? The laws of oak ecology is that if you want to regenerate an oak forest, you have to have advanced oak reproduction on the ground before you remove that overstory. And I've spent my entire career watching foresters in denial of this fact. And so if you take away nothing else, understand that this right here represents, if you're gonna try to regenerate that oak forest from acorns, from seed trees scattered throughout your harvest, ain't gonna work. The results, you're probably not gonna regenerate any oak. If you do get some oak, it's because you got lucky. You've got to do something to get to that far right side of the equation over there. That graph right over there shows you that if you get advanced oak reproduction on site and you're able to put sunlight onto it by removing the overstory, you're going to have success. But to go from the acorn to that advanced oak regeneration is going to take some management input. A silvicultural prescription, usually mid-story control. So this is also from Jeff's publication, and it does a really good job of talking about mid-story removal as the first step in the process of oak shelter woods. So let's define what we have. In the upper block, you've got an oak-dominated overstory. Doesn't have to be every large tree, but there's a component or an abundant component of mature oak in that stand. Remember, those are the guys that are producing the acorns, that are producing the seedlings that eventually are going to become your advanced oak reproduction. And then you've got this shade-tolerant mid-story, your beeches and maple. We've heard that discussion already, that underneath these beautiful oak stands are maple and beech. But on the very bottom, right on that forest floor, if you've got oak trees above, there's a good chance that you've got small, poorly developed oak regeneration. That's the thing just after the acorn, right? It's not tall, vigorous oak reproduction. They tend to be of pretty low vigor until you do something to improve that light condition. So, in a mid-story removal, we're talking about taking out the light-shaded trees with the green arrow, those beech and maple. Now, if you're working on a really dry site, oak really wants to be there. And if you look at this, there's a little bit of a difference. In the top, you've got nearly complete contact in that overstory. What you're looking for is filtered light coming through. That midstory of beech and maple is thick, and that leafy vegetation is going to intercept a lot of your light. So you're not getting the filtered light that you need on the forest ground. So by taking those trees out, the light filters through that crown. If you put too much light on the ground, if you know your forest ecology, yellow poplar is going to be a competitor. If you put too many holes in that canopy and you have a yellow poplar seed source, you're going to start these little pockets of yellow poplar. So getting that light just right is an important part of this. If you're on a really dry site, a xeric site, oak wants to be there, you can be a little more generous with what you take out. You can actually put a little more sunlight because yellow poplar, our main competitor, usually isn't present on those sites. So this is what we start with. This is an oak forest. It's dominated by red oak, white oak, Quercus rubra, and Elba, but it's got a variety of oak species in there. It's got hickory, variety of hickory species. But if you look down below those big trees, you've got this wall of green, and it's mostly maple in this situation, but it could also be beech, it could be sourwood, black gum. It's usually a really diverse combination of those species. And the mid-story control, this is what you're shooting for. You're trying to change that light condition on the forest floor. Hopefully, you've done a really good job of assessing the forest and trying to figure out where you've got the best probability of success, and hopefully mixed in that little vegetation just a few inches off the ground is your oak germinants. They usually are a few years old. Sometimes they could be up to 15 or 20 years old where they've been browsed back, they died off, they never achieved the vigor that they needed to get vertical growth. So, this is where oak management meets the outer bluegrass. So, for a big part of my career, I tried to avoid working in the outer bluegrass. It was frustrating, right? I get called and somebody wanted to cut their oak stand, but it was littered with invasive species. And I'm like trying to slow them down, trying to stop them. Let's work on this. I need the money. I got to go now. Next thing I know, I may refuse to do the timber sale for them, but that timber's gone and that stand's degraded and it never returns to what it could be because you've taken that oak component off and you've let the invasive species go. So the first thing you need to do if you're working in the outer bluegrass and you get the phone call about a great oak stand, there's a lot of times you're going to be looking at something like this. You've got a thick invasive problem and it needs to be treated before you proceed with any of these oak shelter wood, anything. I see people receiving recommendations of doing cedar harvest or a variety of other things. But if that invasive species component is there, it's tough. And so I'm telling you that a lot of times there's not an easy solution to fixing that. And it brings us to a halt. And so either the decision is made to cut the timber without treating the invasives, or nothing happens at all. And the problem just proceeds to get worse. So there's a whole set of challenges when you're working in the outer bluegrass. That non-native invasive species or plants are now occupying that mid-story and that understory strata of the forest. Many foresters and natural resource professionals do not have adequate training or experience in controlling the non-natives. They may even have the knowledge of what to do, but they can't get the funding. if any forest stand improvement work is done or recommended in these situations, the non-native problem just gets worse. And then a lot of times there's just insufficient number of licensed vendors available for herbicide application, chainsaw work, and heavy equipment operation. The problem far exceeds the solution. Now, one of the reasons that I avoided work in the outer bluegrass was because I could do a forest management plan and I could tell them they needed to remove the invasive species, right? But who's going to do it? I did a few cut stump operations. So I'm a businessman. I got to pay my bills, and hopefully I got a little money left over that I can reinvest into the company. It is a tough job doing cut stump and doing it profitably. So I stopped. I couldn't do it. I subcontracted it out wherever I could. I'm out of subcontractors. They see me calling them, and they're like, don't answer the phone anymore. If you do cut stump on bush honeysuckle, drop your card off with me before you go. So it's not a really great solution because it's often overwhelming and it can't be done within the funding structures that we have. And so I'm constantly looking for strategies to deal with these type of problems and get that job done. I got to add to the list that there are some non-native trees, and so here's my list. This is what I run into the most. You guys have your own. You see the same thing. Tree of heaven. I hardly see much paulownia. It's always a component sometimes when I find tree of heaven. But bush honeysuckle, autumn olive. If you work in Marion County, Kentucky, champion autumn olive planters in the 1970s and early 80s. It is all over. Man, that group of folks were ambitious, I can tell you. But autumn olive, we did that to ourselves. We pretty well had government programs to plant it out there, and then a few years later, we gave money to people to pull it up and get it out. So that was great. That's your government at work, right? So multiflora rose, less of a problem. It's really hard to operate in and around multiflora rose, and some of the multiflora rose that I run into are literally a single plant the size of a house. Didn't think that was possible, but it really is, given the right conditions. A little bit of privet, and vine honeysuckle, I kind of just work into my bush honeysuckle operation. They're almost always together there. So the easiest solution I have, I love non-native invasive species that are trees because there's a really easy solution to it. Imazapyr at 20%. You inject it, and I use the word injection, and people think I'm, what are you talking about injection? It's hack and squirt. I just feel like if I'm a consultant and I'm charging a fairly high rate to come in and work on your forest, I got to have a more sophisticated term than hack and squirt. So I go with injection. That's personal preference there. But the one thing that I do with Arsenal is when I'm working with Tree of Heaven, depending on how big that tree is, I can go right down to stems 1 inch in size and give it a hack, and at 20%, 1 milliliter of solution. Now, when I get into the larger stems, a lot of times what I'm going to do is I'm going to start injecting with that machete, and I'm going to keep those hacks within about a 1/4 inch. Sometimes they even overlap. The recommendation for using imazapyr at 20% on native trees, if you're doing some sort of silvicultural removal of, let's say, beech or maple, it's going to be 1 hack and 1 milliliter solution for every 3 inches of diameter. So you get a 6-inch tree, you put 2 hacks in there. Not for Tree of Heaven. You want to go ahead and go completely around that tree, because the size of that root system is going to absorb all that chemical. and it's going to prevent sprouting. A matter of fact, I don't have scientific evidence, just practical experience. If you do 1 in 3 with imazapyr at 20%, you're probably going to prompt some sort of sprouting response from that tree. And you're going to have a bigger mess than you did before. I have never gone back to a tree of heaven job that I've done and said, oh, you know, imazapyr is soil active. It got outside the roots. It killed a lot of stuff around it. Now, it stays in the root system. Those are massive root systems. They're bigger than what you think. They can absorb that. So that's my recommendation. A machete that you can keep sharp, go to Tractor Supply and buy a equine bottle, spray bottle. They tend to be a little bit tougher than the others. And then your imazapyr. And then mix it at 20% and off you go. That's my solution to the tree problem. I usually, so when I talk to, I hardly ever give a detailed explanation of imazapyr application to private landowners because I'm nervous as heck when they go out and they start spraying imazapyr around in the woods. I've seen some really bad results. Imazapyr can get into the soil. If you have a spill, it's going to move through the soil. You're going to have big dead zones. With my group and my applicators, I have never had a problem. But where we've turned it over to a subcontractor or somebody else who didn't follow our instructions, I have seen bad results. It's just, it'll kill all of the forbs and your oak regeneration too, or anything else on the forest floor if you over-apply that. So you don't want to over-apply. That's all pretty much the same. Now, here's one thing. I'm going to switch on you a little bit. This is my imazapyr talk right here. So if I'm doing a mid-story control, that means I'm going in and I'm doing a hack and squirt or an injection on native tree species. And you got to understand that those when you inject a tree with herbicide and you do it at the wrong time of the year, the sap can push that chemical right out. And so I like this. I took a picture. That is a sugar maple. It's about 6 inches in diameter, and that was cut on December 15th back a few years ago. And the sap is flowing on that thing. And if you go out in December and you use imazapyr on beech and maple, a lot of times it'll get pushed right out. That's not in the literature anywhere that I can find. I've learned that the hard way. Going out in the woods, hacking and squirting, coming back at the end of the day and seeing these big wet stains underneath your incisions, you're like, oh man, we just did a whole day's work and probably are only going to kill about 30 to 50% of the trees. So I hate to switch up on you, but imazapyr for invasive tree species, you can do one hack or one incision for every inch or just really do it a really tight 1 milliliter solution for every hack. But if you're working in native hardwoods, if you're doing something like a mid-story control, you've got to adhere to that one hack for every 3 inches of diameter, and you have to respect that time period. You can start in early June, and you can run right through the last day of October. But once you get into November and you got complete leaf drop from those native species, you got to be a little bit careful because they're going to start sending sap up there, and they're setting buds. And so the sap's coming up. Understand your tree species and their ecology. There's everything I just said. So shrubs. Shrubs are the tough one. Non-native invasive species. So, again, you want to do some work in your oak stand, but you got bush honeysuckle. What are you going to do? You can actually inject large bush honeysuckle with the Mazapir at 20%. I've done it. So if you got a large infestation, this is very time consuming to do it this way, but it's really effective. Sometimes you just have a small area and you need to deal with it. This will work. So that's kind of an alternative thing. I never really see that in the literature, but you can do it. You can use a mulching head on heavy equipment, and I've got some pictures of that. The machine operators usually charge by the hour, and NRCS payment rates are by the acre. Somebody's got to do the math to figure out if that's going to work for you. It takes, you got to figure this out before you commit to something like that. Foliar applications, I put a lot of 2% glyphosate on bush honeysuckle. It's effective, and it works really well. And if I've got a spray rig mounted on a UTV and I'm working in the outer bluegrass and I've got access around fields, I can actually cover a lot of ground putting that glyphosate on that bush honeysuckle. Every once in a while, you got to get that backpack out, fill it up, and go into those areas you can't reach. Now, the one thing I did with my UTV mounted rig was I took a Harbor Freight air hose, 50-foot air hose on a recoiling reel, and man, glyphosate is pretty forgiving. You can run it through something like that, and you can get yourself 50 foot of extra hose length, and you can operate it as a one-man operation because, it just ratchets back, itself reels up, and that can be a real time saver for you. And so when you're doing this kind of work, you got to figure out how you're going to save time. 25-gallon spray tank on the back of a UTV and a hose reel from Harbor Freight, man, you're not going to spend a whole lot of money. The biggest expense is the UTV in that whole thing. Cut stump applications, expensive, physically challenging, and creates debris that restricts the follow-up operation. And I have a little niche in my part of Boyle County where I go back after failed NRCS cut stump applications. So somebody hires a contractor, they come out, they do the cut stump, everything looks good for about a year, they walk back into the woods 2 or 3 years later, the bush honeysuckle's over their head again. So, does cut stump work? Absolutely, it can work. Does it often work? It depends on the contractor, the circumstances. That follow-up work, the monitoring and maintenance of a cut stump is crucial. But I'm preaching to the choir, I can tell. Mechanical, I've done this on a couple of different situations, and it works really well, but it's hard. It requires follow-up treatments and monitoring, like all of them. It can open up areas for more cost-effective foliar spraying, so you can create avenues with this and then go in and do some foliar spraying to save yourself some money on the project overall. One of the benefits of this, if you're working in so on the left and on the right, these are pretty nice oak hickory stands. It's got some really nice walnut in it, but it's got a sea of bush honeysuckle. Brandon's here. So this is a site in Anderson County. It's on the Anderson-Mercer line just outside of Selvisa. And so Brandon's been out there. I think he's looked at this one. We did some mechanical on it. But the mechanical rate, and I actually made some notes on this, the mechanical rates on this, the guy was charging $1,860 a day, and NRCS had offered us The written rate was $610 per acre, but somehow he did a little bit of magic and got it up to like 650. But if you do the math on that, they were doing a little under 2 acres per day as far as their productivity with this machine. The landowner would, if they had signed up for the contract, they would have been out $600 per acre. So the cost of the mechanical would have exceeded the NRCS rate by about $600. And this was an 80-acre farm. So if you sign up for that and you go, you're going to be out of pocket $40,000. So we did a few trial acres. We wanted to see how productive the guy was. The machine operator was incredibly productive from 8 o'clock to 11 o'clock, and then from 12 until whenever he decided the day was over, productivity just went off the edge. And so we don't have enough data points. We did about 5 acres on this particular farm. And so we had to figure out some alternative plan to get the whole thing done. I just want to show you the conditions on this particular farm. So I just scanned it. A lot of times people are concerned if I'm going to do a foliar spray of bush honeysuckle, because I might kill some of the native vegetation underneath. There ain't none. Yeah, winter creeper. That's my collateral damage if I'm lucky. So this is just a few seconds of it. And so this just shows you the density of this. This will really work if you can get a productive operator, we got to get some funding to do some trials to get more of this done and try to figure out. So this guy makes his money by landscaping farms in the area. So he's mulching it down to like a walking path. It's not necessary. And so I think we can improve productivity of these sort of things if we can work with independent operators, and with enough time and experience, they could do a better, faster job. I buy Northern Star products. That's just a 25-gallon tank. It comes out of the box looking just like that. I modify it. Your landowners, or glyphosate, 41%, $70, $75, a 2.5-gallon container, fairly inexpensive. And then you got to somehow get yourself some sort of transportation to move that thing around. Foliar applications, apply when leaves are completely open and plant is actively growing. We know that. Foliar is effective before those hot summer days where the plant starts to shut down. But I love those late season applications. If you can time that with a summer application and then later go back in the fall when all the native species have dropped their leaves, man, you can, 1 year, 2 applications, very effective. We use a lot of NRCS money, and without it, I don't think any management would get done. I'm a TSP, so that allows me to write plans, and in addition to EQIP funding, there's CSP funding. That's a little trickier, but it's a source of money. Everything I hear, we're on the cusp of a pretty high budget spending cycle for NRCS and EQIP. So I'm hoping that comes through for my clients. We do the forest management plans, and then we make the prescriptions within those plans. And then CSP is just it's kind of an incentive program. So once you've proven yourself to be a reliable landowner that uses EQIP funds responsibly, you may get the opportunity to sign up in a CSP, or Conservation Stewardship plan. Oak reproduction, coming full circle now. Oak reproduction does respond to improved light conditions in the absence of non-oak competitors. Competitive oak, what's it look like? It's about 4 to 5 feet in height. We can get it. We can get competitive oak reproduction, but we need to control those non-native invasive species first. The outer bluegrass region, that's always going to be your first box to check. There's no getting around it. Once you get it, once you get that oak advanced regeneration and you get it up, you're not done yet. You've got to do removal of the overstory. That means a harvest. That means income. But what you're doing is you're setting the stage for that next forest. There's a whole set of challenges. I think I covered most of them. I think we need some additional training for foresters and to help connect the funding to the landowners so that these things can get done. And I want to leave enough time for questions. Always got to end with a rattlesnake picture.
Got any questions? Oh, no questions?
Covered it all.
I know Jody has a question. Okay.
Winter creeper.
I didn't mention a lot of stuff in there. I always start with the big problems first. And is winter creeper a problem? Yes, but it's not the same magnitude as that tree of heaven, bush honeysuckle, autumn olive problem.
Hello, Chris.
Hello, Michael.
Okay, so you talked about non-native invasive removal being first,
Yes.
and that getting the oak to regenerate to 3 to 5 feet before mature overstory harvest.
Correct.
When and where does the mid-story removal of beech and maple come into play?
Yeah, so Michael, you're in the knob region, and we looked at your farm. So you probably don't have a problem with non-native invasive species. So most of the folks in the outer bluegrass have to deal with that first. But once you're free of those non-native invasive species and you've selected a site that has dominant oak trees and the presence of maybe some small oak regeneration, time to do your mid-story control. So get that plan done, get a good assessment. Non-natives, if they're present, but if they're not, move right to the mid-story control.
Question for you? Oh, question right here.
Oh, have you come across Amber cork tree in Boyle County specifically?
No.
Okay, it's on the top of Catholic Knob. So.
Is it really? So I was out in the woods and I noticed some burning bush. I'm driving with the landowner, and I said, there's some burning bush. And he goes, I don't know where that came from. And then he said, you know what? I think I pulled a few of those out of my yard and threw them over the hill here. Yeah. So he threw them out. So here's the kicker. Inside of that soil that went over with it was heavenly bamboo. I have never seen heavenly bamboo until that day. That was just yesterday. And it looks frightening to me. So that was a double, right? You know, you throw over your burning bush over the side, and it's contaminated with some other nursery stock that, is in seed form. Just keeps giving.
Would you mind reiterating when the competitive oak regrowth is coming up, when you do that harvest cut to allow for that to become?
That's a great question. So it's going to depend on a lot of things. That oak, white oak in particular, is intermediate in its tolerance. And so it can hang around for quite a while. So sometimes we get the oak regeneration before the overstory is ready to remove, and that could be a little tricky. So a timely release of that regeneration is important. It usually takes about 3 to 7 years for that oak to get to a competitive height. And then sometimes you can hold it for 4 or 5 years. So probably, you're looking at anywhere from 3 to 15 years on that timing. The other thing I want to, and I didn't go into a lot of detail on this, your silvicultural prescriptions available for the harvest, once you have the advanced regeneration, you can be quite creative. You could do a kind of a small patch clear cut. You could do a larger clear cut. You could do expanding gap. There's a whole variety of things that are available to you once you've got that advanced oak reproduction. But you got to monitor it. And what you're looking for, the key is that height. And if you get down on your hands and knees, you want that root collar to be at least about a 1/2 inch in diameter. And those are the keys for that timely release. Yes?
Before you can harvest it.
So merchantable trees in a timber sale in Kentucky typically range between 70 and 120 years of age. So your bourbon barrels are coming from 70, 80, 90-year-old trees. So multi-generational management is essential. I can't help anybody who calls me and says, I'm retiring in 5 years, I want to cut my timber, and I'm going to be dead in 15 years. That's my favorite. Whenever I talk to somebody about forest management, they say, I'll be dead. Well, I probably can't work with you because I need enough time to see these silvicultural practices through.
One more, and we're going to give it right back for a follow-up.
What was the height for the competitive growth?
So 3 foot is possible. 4 foot's better. 5 foot is pushing it. So you can get to, if your regeneration gets up 8, 10 feet in height, what's going to happen when you harvest is that tree's going to get bent over. What we actually want, and we didn't go into a lot of detail on this, we're going to run over a lot of those, that young oak regeneration, but that's all right. Oak loves that disturbance, okay? The oak is there because it was probably top killed by a fire at one time, right? And then it regenerates from those root sprouts. I always tell my landowners that you're growing oak root systems. So if you run over the top of that stuff with a skidder, that's great. Breaks off, comes back as a better sprout than what you had originally. So,
All right.
too big, it can be too big, possibly.
Chris, finish us up with one more answer, if you could. You mentioned, at least I think you mentioned, at least we've talked about it, that there is, even within this room, within our whole community, there'll be a lack of experience with implementing and designing practices, especially around things like invasive species management. So in regard to practice planning and implementation, what do we need? Like there's some big things missing from this, right? Just tell us what you think about that.
So I think you need a couple of things. I think you need some good scientific training. And I was looking to the University of Kentucky, the whole White Oak Initiative money funding to put silvicultural classes on. It shouldn't be restricted just to foresters. It should be open to the whole natural resource professional community. And then we need some creativity. So we know our basic principles, we know how to treat these things, but we got to figure out how to stretch our dollars. So I have some landowners that tell me, oh, you know what, I have access to a skid steer. Now, it might not be big enough to mount, it might not have the hydraulic power to mount a specific chopping, mulching device on it, but it may give me avenues. We can create avenues through the infested areas, and we can get spray rigs in there. So I think you gotta educate those professionals. They gotta understand that there's gonna be a certain amount of creativity on their part that's gonna be required, and it's problem solving. It's taking a look at the resources you have available and trying to stretch those funding dollars to get the job done. It's not easy. It's a matter of fact, that's why it doesn't get done. It's tough. All right, thank you.
Okay, I won't keep anybody any longer, but I do just want to say thank you guys again so much. Thank you to all of our speakers and all of our attendees that came out for both days. I hope you enjoyed all of the content and the networking and the good food, and I hope that you'll join us again next year. Just really quick again, please don't forget to fill out our survey. Let us know how we can do better and what you liked about the past couple days. And then also CEU forms, they're already out at the registration tables, so don't forget to fill those out if you need them. And thank you guys again so much. We'll see you next year.